Shall I start?
Please proceed.
Yes, Kritika, please start.
Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the team Calcutta Comparatists 1919, I take this privilege to warmly welcome you to the 46th lecture of the lecture series. Calcutta Comparatists 1919 is an independent forum for research scholars of humanities and social sciences. It carries the legacy of academic study of Indian languages and literature, envisioned by Sir Ashutosh Mukherjee and introduced in 1919 at the University of Calcutta. Later in 2005, a new department was established which still continues to carry research in Indian languages. Calcutta Comparatists 1919 took inspiration from this history, and it is a platform for sharing research interests and ideas. We are organizing online lectures on various interdisciplinary topics to be delivered by academicians and distinguished research scholars of different fields. Thank you for joining us today. Now I will pass over the mic to Jimati. Thank you.
Thank you, Kritika. Today we have with us Professor Himadri Lahiri. Professor Himadri Lahiri is currently Professor of English at the School of Humanities, Netaji Subhas Open University, Kolkata. He is former Professor of Department of English and Culture Studies, University of Burdwan. He has written extensively on diaspora studies, post-colonial studies, and Indian English literature. He has edited and co-edited many books, such as Diaspora Theory and Transnationalism, Contemporary Indian English Poetry and Drama, Violence and its Representations, Ethnic Literature of America, Diaspora and Intercultural Studies, etc. He writes book reviews for newspapers and academic journals. He is a member of various journals like Miller's MELUS Journal of World Literature, the Rupkatha Journal on Interdisciplinary Studies, the Apollonian Journal of Interdisciplinary Studies, etc. He has been awarded the Olive I. Reddick Prize by the Indo-American Center for International Studies in 2001. And he has also been a fellow member of Salzburg Seminar American Studies Alumni Association in Austria in 2006. Today, Professor Lahiri will be talking about Coolie Diaspora Literary Perspective. Sir, it is an honor to have you in our forum. Thank you so much for joining us. Now this virtual stage is yours. You can begin your lecture. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's for me to interact with you, to say something about an area which is my love for quite some time. And therefore, you see that I'll be talking about Coolie Diaspora. And you know that the term Coolie Diaspora sometimes creates problem because of the word Coolie. Now, we are mainly engaged in studying diaspora, but diaspora which has taken place in recent. So our overwhelming interest is generally in post-colonial diaspora, and we do not generally pay the older kind of diaspora, the indentured diaspora that took place in 19th century and early 20th century. So, I take this opportunity to discuss some areas of the Coolie diaspora, which is a huge area. But then you see, from the perspectives of literature, I think it might be beneficial for all of us. I can't say that I know much about this area because in India, you know, interest in the Coolie diaspora has started say about a decade ago or something like that. Therefore, we are trying to gather knowledge, we are trying to gather information about what it means in history and in some sociology. For example, there are some good writings, critical writings on Coolie diaspora, which is also called indentured diaspora. But then in English literature, or Anglophone literature, we do not have access to many writings. You know that not that nothing has been written, that no literary works prevail, not that absolutely we do not have access to those, but then you see that we have come to know about these areas more recently, years back. And recently, even in India, there are groups, there are critical groups, critical artists, critical critics who are trying to do some very useful researches in the area, and mainly from the perspectives of the Indians. Okay, so for particular group, which is known usually as a group which is engaged, is actually spearheaded by Professor Judith, who is a very in this respect. And I'm also a part of the group, and it is because of my association that I have come to know something about this particular area. But my point is very clear. Look at the different syllabi, different curriculum of Indian universities, and we'll find that you can find in the list of readings, then it is rather surprising. Very recently, maybe for 2 years or 3 years, not before that. So why is it that we have been for a long time, or not, we didn't know much about this diaspora, the indentured diaspora, which started after and continued up to say 1917 or something like that. So why is it our energy and time in studying this literature? One reason is obviously that books were not available. Books, literary works, were not widely available. It is because of the example, Amazon or Flipkart, that only recently we works are also available now. For a decade or so, Indian publishing houses are also watching these works, and I will talk about some of these works in this lecture. Now, one reason why we had been a bit ignorant and maybe not careful enough to know about the details of the diaspora, which took place in the 19th century and early 20th century, is that the people who went over to different countries were not many of them didn't have any education at all. Only a few had. And therefore, it is very difficult to come across any work, literary or not even, we do not even come across biographies, memoirs, etc., etc., etc. Only there are only a very few biographies for that matter. Today, I will discuss to a certain extent one such biography written by Totaram Sanadha, and that gives us a rich area of information, and which was also political in nature, this particular biography. It was written to achieve some political effect. I will come to that later on. But as I said, it was basically a diaspora of people who belonged to the lower class. They belonged to the lower caste, and lower class as well. And therefore, their migration did not elicit much interest, and this remained a neglected field of study for a long time. Now, you know that coolie, in India, we use the term coolie in the sense of the people, porters, in fact, who carry luggage. But the word coolie was used by the British colonial agents in a derogatory sense. They referred to basically the unskilled laborer. But then it was totally out and out a derogatory term, which also dehumanized them. So from that point of view, these coolies formed a class which did not easily come into the studies of mainstream historians and sociologists. Only very recently, as I said, they became a very important area of studies. Now, you see that in the early 19th century, there were three particular kinds of migrants. There were three different types of the migrants, labor migrants, who are number one, coolies or indentured laborers, number two, Kangani laborers, and number three, maestris. So these are the three particular types of people who are laborers, basically. Most of them were uneducated, as I said, and they moved to different parts of the world. But then you know that you also come across narratives in India written in Hindi, written in Assamese, written in even English, where you also come across the word coolie, and especially in regard to the plantation, tea plantation in Assam, the narratives which concerned tea plantation, there you will find that there are quite the number of references to coolies, because these coolies were collected from different parts of India under the indenture system. So indenture system, which came gradually into operation from the 1930s, and later on it gradually broadened in 1950s and 1960s. It was a very useful kind of process for them, for the British colonizers to export laborers from India to elsewhere. As I said, not that these were not even sent to other parts of the country as well. In a novel called Maqam, you may have heard the name of this, the title of this novel, which is written by Rita Chaudhuri. Originally, it was written in Assamese, and later on it was translated into English and published by Rupa. This novel is about the Chinese migrant laborers who came to India and settled down. But then when you read a novel like that, you will find that there are references to the indenture laborers who are just called coolies. So description of the Indian laborers in Indian narratives, where you come across the term coolie, which were regarded as a derogatory term, but which continued for a long time, because at the helm of affairs, there were the British colonizers who had their interest in broadening their purpose of entering into every corner of the colonies. Okay, so it was as part of the colonial economy that this term became it stabilized gradually in the vocabulary of the migration, in the vocabulary of the labor migration mainly. And you know that jocularly, the modern post-colonial diaspora, which is basically a diaspora of middle class and upper middle class, jocularly, these people are also called cyber coolies. Okay, it has its history in the 19th century use of the term coolie. So you know, if you look at the term, if you have examine the traces of the term coolie, you will find a whole lot of history which is hidden. And this history is about British colonization. It is about British colonialism and its policies, about capitalism, British colonial capitalism. And it is because of the British colonial capitalism that the tea gardens in different places, in Sri Lanka, for example, and in India, in Assam, or in areas near Darjeeling, they grew. And therefore, they needed to tap into sources of the collection of the laborers, continuous flow of the laborers, and that is why they actually took help of the legal means, and they formulated laws, and through which this migration of this taking off the coolies were legalized. Interestingly, as you know, as I said, that there was one of the main processes of gathering laborers was the indentured labor system, but there were two other processes as well. And as I said, they were Kanganing and the Maestri. And in fact, it is often thought that all the three terms, Coolie, Kangani, and Maestri, these had their origin in Tamil. It is usually supposed, but we cannot be very definite about that. But you know that the Kangani, for example, came from the word Kankani, which is a Tamil word, and you know that means I, and Kani means keep. There is a word which refers to I, and the other word is so. Kangani basically referred to people who were like observers, who were foremen, and Maestri also referred to. It is supposed to have come from Tamil, and it also refers to the similar kind of activity, similar kind of the migrant laborer, which basically meant the foreman or the supervisor or something like that. So interestingly, you know that Kangani and Maestri, they are used in the context of migration of laborers to Sri Lanka and South Asia and Southeast Asia. In South Asia, it's mainly Sri Lanka, which was Ceylon at that time. And you see, it is through the Kangani system that the laborers were sent to both Ceylon and Malay, which Malaysia later on. And Maestri was the system through which laborers were sent to the Southeast Asian countries, mainly Burma. So you see, all these were basically they depended on, they were based on agreements. And the last two, the Maestri and the Kangani, they depended largely on close familial ties. Someone who is in a laborer who will go to Sri Lanka, Ceylon, or to Burma, or to Malay, through close familial connection, they actually collected many other laborers under the headmanship of a maestri or a kangani. So this was the process through which laborers were exported to our neighboring areas, and it was mainly through indenture system that laborers were sent to other countries, overseas countries, like, as you know, Fiji or Mauritius or Guyana, in other Caribbean countries, even to South America, and later on to many other countries. We do not usually come across, indentured laborers to Australia or New Zealand, but then there were also indentured laborers were also sent to Australia and New Zealand and countries like that much later. Totaram Sanadha, also in his book, My 21 Years in the Fiji Island, visits to Australia in order to assess the position of the laborers who are working over there. So you see, although this Australian and the New Zealand based workers were not discussed much, are not discussed much in the migration, in the history of the migration of the Coolie diaspora. Even then, you see, these were very much part and parcel of the history and literature of. So this is a kind of introduction. My is basically a feature of introduction, but then I will move to other areas. I will talk about certain things we find in the literary some basic common some common historical events that will find historical and social events that you will find references to these you will find in literary works as well. Therefore, I will obviously like to talk about these things for some 10 or 15 minutes, go to some literary works. Within an hour or so, I don't think I can do justice to the this area, but then I will try to give an overview, try to give some idea about what kind of literary works we come across in the Coolie literature about the Coolies. You know that the Coolie literature, Coolie diaspora, ironically happened just after the abolition of the slavery, okay, which was passed in 1833-34 in the British Parliament, and because of the plight of the slaves, because of the reports coming about the Middle Passage. Because of the reports of abuses being carried on in different colonies and in different places like the Caribbean colonies, like Caribbean islands, or even in the US, you know, gradually in the 19th century and in the 20th century, you know, there was one after another country actually abolished slavery. So British Parliament abolished slavery, effectively came into use in 1834. And Coolie diaspora immediately took place because, as you know, economy cannot, it abhors a vacuum. Because the economy, the plantation economy, which was the colonial economy, which needed labor. There was capital over there, and but there was no labor because of the sudden abolition of the source of the labor supply, the plantation owners, they pressurized the government and other agencies to introduce some kind of a system which would facilitate the supply of the coolie, supply of laborers to the distant colonies of British colonies and even other European colonies. In fact, the coolies didn't go to just the British colonies, but they also went to other colonies like French colonies or the Dutch colonies. So you know that the coolie was basically a creation of the colonial economy, the colonial system of exploitation. It is not that the British who were stationed in India and there are many such British officers who didn't want that coolie diaspora should take place, indentured diaspora should take place, because that will mean a paucity of in the supply of the coolies to the different Indian centers where coolies are required. But then it was because of the Industrial Revolution, because of the need for coolies in different colonies, plantation economy, that the government had to do something about the supply of the coolies to different places, overseas places. And therefore, the indentured labor system, the migration system came. Now, it initially wanted to try to assume a human face, because it was not obviously overtly based on direct exploitation, direct coercion, and it was supposed, the coolies were supposed to sign an agreement, and the agreement will specify everything, their name, their age, their areas of residence, and many other things like that. And also it will be specified to which place they are being sent. And as a part of the agreement, it was decided that all kinds of facilities that they will be provided, that will be documented in the agreement. All these were done. But interestingly, as you know, which is also very expected, because the coolies were not very educated people. So what happened is that the coolies couldn't read the agreement. Okay, although it was written in Hindi as well, or Tamil as well. And I have also come across one document which was written in Bengali. But even then, these people were not literate people. These people came from the distant places, from the remote villages, and they couldn't read anything, and therefore they were duped. They were duped by the arkatis, the middlemen. And although the agreement talked about, the laws talked about that everything should be told to the coolies or the laborers, but most of the times the truth was actually not revealed. And therefore, most of these people, they were victims of arkatis. Okay, arkatis were not legal agents, but they were the agents of the agents, some kind of sub-agents, and they were scattered all over India. And they went to the different villages and asked whether somebody was in need of some job. And their persuasion, because of the persuasion, many people joined, and ultimately many people didn't know where they are heading for. So this is one aspect which we should keep in mind. But the novels and the biographies and the autobiographies, memoirs, all these things also talk about another problem And these problems are not usually reflected in the literary, not in a very expressed way, reflected in the literary works being produced from the descendants of the Coolie diasporas in different colonies, erstwhile colonies. But they are gradually coming into focus these days. So what are the problems that made many of the people rush to flee? They fled their own countries, their own villages. Number one reason obviously was poverty, and there were drought. Because of the drought, because of the poverty, because of the scarcity of the food, people fled their countries. Okay, for example, Peggy Mohan has written a book which is called Jahajin. In Jahajin, he speaks of a character called Didu who fled his village in North India because of the drought and because of the scarcity of food, because of poverty. Okay, and besides these reasons, there were other reasons also. For example, women mainly left the families, sometimes disguising their names, because they were either driven or they left the families on their own free will, because, you know, they were tortured in the families. Many of them were widows, and widows were not tolerated. They were tortured in the families, and they were all often driven out of the families. Okay, but there were other reasons also. For example, there were wives who couldn't deliver male children, male issues, and therefore they were tortured, and as a result of which many left the families. There are many kinds of caste injustices, and because of this injustice, many people fled their villages. So as a whole, India itself, its condition, its economic conditions, its social systems, these were responsible for creating a big labor force which the British government tapped in a very, very interesting way. So this labor force was already ready, and the British people, they required only a legislation through which they can send these people. But we should also remember that there were many other very nuanced kind of things that you can find, because you know that mainly the Brahmin coolies, Brahmin indentured laborers, and the women, they often did not give their original exact names and the places. Even when they had to fill up the forms, they gave false names, because the Brahmins were afraid of revealing their identities. They were higher caste people, and they will be traveling with lower caste people, and they will have to cross the Kalapani. And Kalapani was a forbidden area for the Brahmins, basically, but for all Hindus. And therefore, they did not want to reveal their identities, and many of them actually threw off the sacred thread in the Ganges, in the waters of the Ganges, while they were waiting to be exported to different places, waiting to be exported in garden-rich areas, waiting to be exported to different places. So this is one interesting aspect of the this particular diaspora, for which later historians and even common people who were writing literary works, they could not find, they had to struggle to find the original identity of somebody's grandmother or grandfather, etc. So history, digging history was a very difficult thing. And therefore, you see, it is a challenge, real challenge for not only the historians, but also the writers. There are many feminist writers. For example, Gayatri Bahadur, who wrote a book which is supposed to be a history book, but which is not exactly that kind of history that we read. There is also other kinds of writings, fiction, for example, the Swinging Bridge, for example. So I will refer to these works later on, but then, these works actually foreground the challenge that the protagonists, the speakers, who try to retrieve the identity of their foremothers or forefathers. This task become very, very next to it was almost impossible for them to find out the exact location of the villages from where their ancestors came, the identity of their forefathers or the foremothers, and therefore you see the stories had to be built up on the basis of some kind of memorialization. Memory became a very important focus in their writings, and it was a kind of travel back to the past, a past which would not reveal so easily because of the lack of materials that you cannot find, in the archives, in the mainstream archives, for which you have to tap other sources. Okay, I will be talking about this a bit later. So this was the position of the Indian situation, which actually paved the way for the migration of the Coolies. Okay, now the Coolie diaspora is also called Gidmit diaspora. Gidmit diaspora, is the word Gidmit is widely used, and that writers like Brij Filal, who is a historian, in his thesis submitted to his to an Australian university, he used the term Girmitia mainly instead of Coolie or instead of indentured laborers. Girmitia was a much more used term in the plantation economy, and even in the society that came up later in the late 20th century and early 21st century. There also Girmitia is a very current term. So Girmitia is a word which is a corruption of the word agreement, because the coolies or the indenture system made it a compulsory thing. The agreement, signing of the agreement was a compulsory exercise, and this agreement, the common people, they could not actually pronounce the word properly, and therefore they ultimately mispronounced the word, and from the mispronunciation, agreement become Girmit. Okay, so this is one very interesting kind of development in the linguistic history or linguistic aspect of the history of the Coolie diaspora. Language traveled, and as language traveled, different words, and not only words, but also rites and rituals, they changed over the journey. And you will find very interestingly, in the Girmit society of today, there are certain rites and rituals which have changed because they came in contact with the local cultures. But also there are certain things, certain ideas, certain parts of the language, components of the language, certain rites and rituals they remained same as it remained in the 19th century, early 19th century India. I can give you one example. I have seen a group of students coming to India. They came to my university, University of Burdwan, in connection with a seminar, and they lay prostrated while they did their pranams. So the Brahmins or the Hindus, they what is Bengali in Bengali is called Shashtange Pranam, Shashtange Pranam, Shuye Pore Pranam, to lie prostrate and show reverence to the elders. This is what they still do, although in India things have changed and we do not usually, except a few sects, we have moved away from that Shashtanga Pranam. So there are systems like that which exist as it was in the early 19th century India, in the villages and in the towns and in the cities. But there are many other things. For example, the songs, the performances, they changed a great deal that came in contact with other kinds of cultural performances in the countries of their residence. So these things happen. But I just wanted to point this out because this might appear interesting to you. And if some of you are interested in doing research in the area, you can obviously delve deep into these aspects, which might yield interesting facts and figures, okay, interesting cultural significance. So this is one. But then another aspect which all the works, right from Sanadha, Totaram Sanadha, Espinet, Peggy Mohan, or Amitabh Ghosh's Sea of Poppies, all these works also talk about the sea journey, and the sea journey was a kind of experience that transformed their status. The sea was, as you know, that Walcott said, the sea is history. And in fact, the sea is history even for, not only for the people who went through the Middle Passage experiences, of which Walcott was a child, was one of the descendants of that history, but the descendants of the Coolie diaspora, they also can say that the sea is history, because in the sea lies enough materials for excavation. And Amitabh Ghosh has done a remarkable job. He did research a lot, and he reconstructed the 19th century journeys, because Sea of Poppies is a narrative of a journey that is based in the 1930s. So you know that there is a kind of a reconstruction there, because archival materials did not yield much, and therefore on the basis of that, whatever was available, and on whatever should be imagined on the basis of whatever you listen to the story, whenever you listen to the stories of the older generation of people, or you give your ear to the rumors that are in currency in certain areas, in certain communities, or you listen to the mythical stories that are being told in the communities, or you come in contact with the material objects, like, for example, a letter written by some Girmitiad, or somebody back in India wrote a letter to someone who is a Girmitia in the colony, or some ornament that is there very much in the family heirloom or similar, or some kind of diary. Diaries were not found very much because most of these people were not literate. But there were some written elements also, written things also. So on the basis of these things, the historians and the literary artists, they reconstructed the past and they wrote their history. And one particular component, whether you go to Ramabai Espinet's The Swinging Bridge, or Peggy Mohan's Jahajin, or the anthologies that are coming into existence these days, and there is one beautiful, very effective anthology, which is actually edited by Davidin. That I will like to give details of the anthology. You might be interested in that. It was edited by David Davidin et al. And the title of this is We Mark Your Memory, Writings from the Descendants of Indentured. It was published in 2018 by University of London. So this is one very important aspect in which the descendants of the Coolie diaspora, Coolies, they came together and they wrote. They came together to compile an anthology. So, much of the recent writings which are coming from the different indentured societies in the different colonies, erstwhile colonies, many of them are results of certain projects, academic projects. They are results of some people, some scholars who are engaged in researches. So part and parcel of the new writings that are coming up for the last 10, 20 years, the last 2 decades or so, they are in a way associated with the academic works, or at least the academic people. And these people are talking about the journey. They are talking about India and how these people were treated in India, and they are bringing out the micro narratives of these people. They are being driven out from their home. They are taking the journey, crossing the Kalapani, and their stories of settlement in the new spaces. All these things are becoming part and parcel of the new writings. Earlier writings are, which are Indo-Canadian writings or Indo-Guyanese writings or Indo-Caribbean writings, Indo-Fijian writings, Indo-Mauritian writing. These writings, these creative writings, which were taking place or which are still taking place now, are being written. They talk mainly about the people who are already settled in the new societies and how they are coping with the challenges of the multiculturalism, or how they should cope with the relationship, formulate their relationship with other communities, the natives of the places or other migrant communities. These are the staple subject matter of those writings. And these writings do not go into the past in a vigorous way as the literary works which are being written for the last 2 decades have been doing. Okay, and please mind that these works are associated with the academic institutions, academic projects, and academic people. So this is one important thing that I want to point out here. You know that Amitabh Ghosh's Sea of Poppies or Jahajin, Peggy Mohan's work, or you see Ramabai Espinet's The Swinging Bridge, they, because of their researches into the past of their great-grandmothers, going back into 3-4 generations, through ways which are uncharted. They are writing a different kind of novels. They are writing different kind of short stories. And this is where we should put our emphasis. In all the novels that I have talked about, you will find whatever I have spoken so far. And in addition to that, they also talk about the journey of the people, the journey of the Jahajins, the journey of the Coolies, the indentured laborers. And what is the importance of this journey? One very significant point is that it speaks of the gravitational pull. You think of the characters, main character, for example, Diti in Amitabh Ghosh's novel, you find that they inevitably look back to the land they are living when they cross the Sundarbans, the areas Sundarbans, and they get into the Bay of Bengal. Okay, they immediately look back because this is the moment of when the gravitational pull is being snatched. Okay, India forever will recede, even though not in their memory, but in their actual life. What they called home or the home country will certainly go into semantic changes. The meaning will change. So these semantic changes are being dwelt on by the authors and the characters. They reflect on that. This is one very interesting point in the narrative. And these narratives are often called Odyssey. And you see that the word Odyssey will come across in the subtitle of Gayatri Bahadur's history. I would say history, but this is a factional history, which is a faction is a term, as I have spoken of elsewhere. Faction is a term which is coined by Brij Bilal, a historian, who is also a descendant of Coolie diaspora. Faction means, it is a portmanteau word, which means fact and fiction. As a historian, you see, Brij Bilal thinks that writing on the basis of fact is not enough. That will not yield history as it happened. So in order to get the history, you will have to have resort to the fiction. But the fiction should be objective in approach. So with the help of both facts, which are available in the archives, mainstream archives, and other kind of fictions, which you come across and which you have to resort to yourself, on the basis of these two tools, you will have to build up your fiction or your history or your narrative. History also becomes a different kind of a representation. History is representation. But then this kind of history became much more representation because it is fictional elements. You listen to the titles of the books that I will refer to, and I think if you are not familiar with these books, you might give a chance. You might try to read these books. You will find that the journey motif will come. You will come across journey motif in somewhere in the title, in some obvious fashion or not so obvious fashion. For example, Gayatri Bahadur's book, Coolie Omen, which is basically a narrative of finding out the history of Gayatri Bahadur's own great-great-grandmother. So that history must be found out, and and this book is the narrative of that, the search. Okay, and the title is Coolie Omen, the Odyssey of Indentured. The word Odyssey, a very heavy word for that matter, because of its epic dimensions, epic association. You see, the word Odyssey has been used, and the Gayatri Bahadur has not used this word without much reflection. Don't think that. she wants it to be of immense importance. At least for her and historians of her ilk, this word is a significant word in the title. And then Devidin's title, the anthology's title is We Mark Your Memory, Writings from the Descendants of Indentured. Here the word descendants automatically suggests that the descendants will obviously resort to a certain kind of a search which will imply a kind of a journey, even if not a physical journey, but at least a mental journey. Amitabh Ghosh's Sea of Poppies, sea itself is suggestive of the space which hides the journey, the history of the journey. Peggy Mohan's Jahajin, the ship itself, Jahajin meaning the ship, someone who travels by ship, is a semiotic signifier of the journey. Bridgevillal's memoir, on the other side of midnight, a Fijian journey. Here also you'll find a journey, something like that. So in novels and other narratives, you will come across this journey, which is the basic component, basic material of their narratives. So what is so significant about the journey? The authors looked back, Peggy Mohan, for example, or Ramabai Espinette, for example. Okay, they look back because they think that it should contain, it must have been associated with stories, micro stories. And in excavating the micro stories, what they found that this group of people who traveled for, say, for about 50 days, usually the journeys took 50 to 90 days in the early 19th century. Gradually, with the development of the ship industry and technology related to shipbuilding, the journeys were shortened and it came down to, say, about 40 days or 50 days. So during these 40 days or 90 days, in between 40 to 90 days, they spend together, they form the community, and they conceive the ship as their dwelling place. In an article that I have recently written and which will be published, I think, about 6 months or 7 months later, I have dealt with how the ship is considered to be a home, a housing. Okay, so the concept of the dwelling, I have applied the concept of the dwelling, taking it from Heidegger. I have tried to explain the concept of the dwelling here. So I'm not going into that, but what is important is that the ship was the Ma Bap, the father and mother. Okay, one of the characters in the Sea of Poppies says, "It is our Ma Bap." So it is our mother and father. So you see, a kind of family formation is already taking place. And this family formation is not based on just on blood relationship. It is based on rather a kind of experience of the co-passengers. All the co-passengers form, despite difficult nature of the journeys, despite the operations that the agents of the colonial masters, they perpetrated on them, they formed a kind of a community, and this community, as you know, they formed a kind of a relationship. So the terms Jahaji Bhais, shipmates, ship brothers, and later Jahaji Bahins, ship sisters or sisters of the ship, these terms were coined, and these terms got their currency, they became very rooted terms in the new societies they formed in the new colonies, in the plantation economies, okay, their own Indian societies. What is the significance of this society? This society is, at least initially, since they comprised people who came from different social strata. Some were Brahmins, some were they came from very lower strata. There were Rajputs, there were hill people. All these people coming from different castes and classes, even to a certain extent, they had to give up the caste barriers, okay, because they knew that they are going, all of them are to face the same fate. They cannot come back so easily to their own lands. Their caste is lost, and therefore what happens, that a kind of a casteless society, the roots of a casteless society, the foundation of a casteless society was formed during this new journey, okay? And later on, these were they were reinforced in the new spaces, new diasporic spaces. Therefore, you see that this process is very, very clear in Diti, because you know that Diti is one of the main characters in Sea of Poppies. In her descriptions and all other people's descriptions, from the perspectives of all other people, you see, this becomes very, very prominent. You see that in other stories also, in Swinging Bridge, for example, Swinging Bridge has three parts, okay? The first part is called Borrowed Time. The second part is called Manahamba Road. Third part is called Karoni Dab. But interestingly, all these three parts are prefaced by a chapter. This chapter is called Kalapani. Okay, and all these chapters are called Kalapani, and these chapters have different fonts. Okay, they are printed in a different way. They are italicized. The other parts of the narration, they are not printed in italics. So the italics, these three parts called, the prefaces to the three parts called Kalapani, the three chapters, they are called Kalapanis, and three chapters are distinguished, are differentiated from the main field of the story. The main field of the story actually talks about the protagonist, the female protagonist Mona's search for the identity of her great-grandmother. And you know, during this process, she excavated the story, but the Kalapani narratives in these three chapters, that speaks about India, that speaks about the journey, that speaks about what happened during the journey, what kind of family formation, what kind of prejudices, what kind of sacrifice of the prejudices took place during that journey. And during the narration of these three parts, you will find that the motif of their being outcast, okay, and they are being exilic people. The motif of the exile becomes very, very prominent, okay? They have a feeling that they can never return to the old land, not only because they can't, but because they can't because of the social restrictions that will be imposed upon them. So they became forever exilic people, and this reference to exilic sentiment is reinforced by references to, while they were journeying through the Western African coast where Napoleon Bonaparte was exiled. That is one important motif that is embedded in the narration. And another important motif was the history that is referred to but not elaborated. But any perceptive reader can find that the history of the exodus of the black people who they were all coerced into the slavery, and their journey from the West Coast to the Americas. So you see the very focus of the Kalapani, these 3 chapters, that is very much there in the narration. The same kind of narration you will also find in the other stories that I have spoken about, but I'm not going into that. I will just talk a bit. I think I have almost probably spent an hour or so. I should not talk much. So may I take some 5 minutes or 10 minutes?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. There is not a problem.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Please.
Take some...
Please continue.
Okay. So you see that from that point of view, I will just say that if you look at the corpus of, I'm not going into the details of the novels or the biographies or memoirs, because I would just leave hints so that you can get interested. Or I'm more interested in giving you the overall idea and the main motifs that a research scholar can get into, so that if they are interested, they can excavate much more and then have some kind of area which will be very useful for them to excavate, dig up. Okay, so you know that I will talk about Sanadha, Totaram Sanadha. Totaram Sanadha's book is an exception in the sense that it was written by a person who was himself a Girmitia, was himself a Coolie. And it is not being written by a descendant, some 3 or 4 generations removed from him. So it is a first generation narrative. It is a memoir, but it is a first generation narrative. And the complexion of the narrative will naturally be a bit different. Okay. You know that the narratives, the fictional narratives that I spoke about, all of them have some common focus. And these are retrieval narratives. And you understand what the word retrieval implies. Retrieval obviously means some kind of research, excavation, digging up, some amount of silence. The silence must be broken. The grandmothers, Gayatri Bahadu's grandmothers didn't leave back any kind of letter, any evidence of what she felt, who she was. So these women were brave women. In women's writing, written from feminist points of view, these were retrieval narratives which very much fit into the post-colonial motif of finding out stories. Find out stories of the repressed. In a way, through these narratives, what happens is that the repressed come back. It is the narratives are the narratives of the return of the repressed. You can explain the term return of the repressed in different forms, in different ways. You know the implication of the term. who used that and in which sense it was used. So you see, in a sense, these were all returns of the repressed, the return of the specters of the past. The specters which did not say anything. It was not like Hamlet's spectral presence, Hamlet's father's spectral presence. So return, in a sense, was impossible. And in order to make that impossible possible, the feminist writers like Peggy Mohan, like Ramabai Espinet, or writers like historians like Gayatri Bahadur, they all returned to India. And some of them even made actual journeys into India to go into the supposedly ancestral village or something like that. So it was not an armchair kind of narrative writing. It required research, even for the fictional writers. You see that these writings actually had a journey motive, as I have spoken of, but this journey was temporal journeys. Temporal journeys that the protagonists or the speakers, they took from the present moment to the past. And they came back so that these stories can be told to the future, which is very much also part of the design, the feminist design. But you know, Sanadha, Totaram Sanadha, who wrote this in 1914, which was translated in 1991, he was a male writer. He wrote it himself as a coolie or a girmitia. And as an exception, as one of the few exceptions, she came back to India to tell his story. And this writing is also political in nature. I say political because it had great impact on the nationalist movement during the in the early 2 decades of the 20th century, right? So you see, it was the Congress leaders, nationalist leaders, and people like C.F. Andrews, for example, they were greatly impacted by the book had great impact on them. And Sanadha contacted Gandhi and other Congress leaders, and he was made a representative in the Madras Congress meeting. And all these make it a different kind of a narrative altogether. And I also will refer to Amitabh Ghosh's style of writing. Although Amitabh Ghosh writes a narrative, but that is a linear narrative. Although there is a looking back and looking forward kind of thing here and there, but main thrust of the novel is basically a linear kind of narrative. For example, if you take the story of Diti or any other character for that matter, you will find that it is told from the village where Diti lived, how she was exploited, and then she escaped Shoti. During this time, Shoti was prohibited, and even then Shoti was being performed here and there illegally, and many of the women in the Coolie diaspora escaped Shoti. So you see that these people, the narration in Amitabh Ghosh is therefore a linear kind. So village, they left the village, came to Calcutta. There is a journey there by train. First they went to Benares, where women congregated in temples. There are many prostitutes there. There are many deserted women there. And all these were easy targets of the Arcatis. And they were gathered together and taken to Garden Reach depot. And from there, they went to different places like Mauritius or Fiji or wherever it may be. So the narrative is a linear narrative, and it is a kind of omniscient narration. But in the feminist writings which are being written now, the author is uncertain of his voice, or his or her voice, mainly her voice, and there are other characters who intervene in the narration, and they insert their stories. And the protagonists or the narrators, they're interested in these stories. So they break the narrative. And through such a method, the narratives are built up. Totaram was not a very educated person, but he could write and read. And after his indenture came to an end, he actually traveled to different plantations, collected proofs of the injustice done by the people, took photographs, and wrote to the Indian governments, etc., etc. And then when he came back to India, he came back in 1914 in collaboration with Benarasi Lal. I'm forgetting the the surname of the person. I will, if I recollect, I will tell you. Benarasi Lal actually acted as an amanuensis. So through this amanuensis, he wrote the book. The book in Hindi was published in 1914, and it was called Fiji Dip Mein Mere 21 Varsh, which was translated by John Duncan Kelly and Uttara Singh. Uttara Singh mainly translated it. It was called, the English translation is called My 21 Years in the Fiji Islands. It was published in 1991. It is a graphic narrative of how he was in India, oppressed, and how he was trapped by an Arkati. He was a Brahmin, but even then he had to leave. And initially he had caste prejudice, but ultimately his caste prejudice was actually evaporated later on. And he suffered, and he gave a narrative of his sufferings along with the sufferings of the others. And when all these things were narrated, he also traveled to Australia and spoke about what happened in Australia, as I said. So he also wrote a kind of a ghost story, and how when he lived in a house which was almost a ghost house, what happened to him, and how he encountered some kind of ghost. You can take the meaning of the ghost metaphorically as well. So all these things he spoke, and then what should be done, and how he actually is a kind of activist writing. All these things are very prominent here. He speaks of the role of the contemporary newspapers. Bharat Mitra is, for example, a very important newspaper which printed the news sent from the colonies, and which made the government sit up and take notice. The British government took notice and investigated some instances of injustice. So through such writings, activist writings, he left a very important document, and it is one of the extant documents. This is not easily available now. I didn't get it in book form, but in Fiji archive, in an archive in Fiji, this can be digitally accessed. The Hindi version can be accessed. It was published in a Hindi journal, weekly journal probably, and that can be accessed. I accessed the Hindi version also. So only through, if you are perseverant enough, you can tap these sources. For me, it was a difficult task when I first searched for the articles, for the particularly this document, but ultimately I found. So I will just actually I will just quote, read out two quotations which will point out two aspects of the indentured laborer there. Okay, the condition of the indentured laborer there, and the activist voice you can also find here. The first quotation is like this. I read, my countrymen drop from the caste their brothers who have made ocean journeys and then returned from the islands. They give them so many troubles that with the sadness they return to the islands again. Some of their wealth, which they earn penny by penny with great difficulty, going to foreign country and suffering assaults, disgraces, and hunger, is taken by close relatives, unquote. This is one quotation. What does it speak about? What does it talk about? It talks about the plight of the returnees. When they come back, they are not taken into the society, because they have supposedly lost their caste because they had taken they have crossed the Kalapani. Okay, so would be reappropriated in the society, but that will have to be done through some rites and rituals. So these rites and rituals are engineered by caste people, caste Brahmins, who actually made them compulsory, and these required a lot of spending. Okay, through this spending, the headmen, the caste heads, the Brahmins, and the relatives, near relatives, they all exploited these people. So in a way, he talks about the malady of the contemporary society, the social illness that contributes to the continuation of the indentured laborers movement. If this can be stopped, in fact, abolitionists in India during the late 19th century and early 20th century, mainly in the early 20th century, they distributed many pamphlets in many villages free of cost, so that the common people do not fall prey to the Arpatis and other agents of the colonial imperial agents, I would say. So this is one important quotation from there. In what way what is the style of the biography, the memoir? This is another quotation that I will read out, and then I will stop. May I ask the speech-giving religious people of our country, what is the harm of mixing these people into the caste again? Oppressed by the outrages of the home, fooled by the wicked Arkatis, sent to the foreign country, what are the defects in this of these helpless people? So you see, these are rhetorical questions. These are rhetorical questions directed towards particular groups of people. Some such questions are directed to the leaders, political leaders. Some others are directed towards the religious leaders. Some others are to the press of the time. Some others to the British intellectuals who played a very important role in the abolition of slavery. So through a style which is usually bare, but towards the end of the narrative, he constantly pushes, throws rhetorical questions to particular groups of people who are his readers, listeners, through such kind of a style and material. He's trying to bring back the consciousness of the common people of India, common people who are either ignorant of the plight of the indentured coolies or innocent about the fact that the coolies really did exist or do exist. So by bringing them back into visible images, invisible images, by giving them words, Sanadda, whose work is one of the very few works written directly by a coolie himself, actually does a yeoman's job. His work contributed in a way to the abolition of the coolie indentured system in the second decade of the 20th century. With this, I would like to stop, and if there are questions for discussion, I will be very happy to discuss. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for this amazing lecture. It was so informative and in every aspect, both in literary and theoretically. Sir, we'd like to move towards the question and answer session. Kingshuk, if there are any questions or comments on sir's lecture. Yeah, Shomipendra sir has said, very engrossing lecture, sir, as always. The idea of the ship as home is also very interesting. It's true. Sir, like, I would like to ask a question, like, this terms, the Jahaji Bhai or Jahaji Behin, so are they still, like, present as in the linguistic arena of the communities, in the indentured communities?
Of course, they are, because you come across them in the literary writings, they come across them in critical writings. These two terms are very, very obvious. They recur again and again. And although I do not have direct familiarity with the people of the colonies, for obvious reasons, I cannot testify to that whether they are speaking. But my idea from the literary and critical sources or the other kind of writings or what I gather from other scholars, I think that these are very much prominent. But you know that people are also, the new generations are also moving away from the old history. They don't want to move away generally, not giving much emphasis or importance to the history of the past, because they feel that the history is very much in their veins. So in order to define their identity, in order to know what they are, they ask this question, they go back into the history, and then they move forward. And while they are in the process of the such journey, actual journey and metaphorical journey, temporal journey and physical journey, obviously what happens is that they retain they carry forward the words and the rites and the rituals. So I feel that the words like that, because the entire society is based on the idea of Jahaji Bhais and Jahaji Bahins. Okay, so there was almost not a single family which cannot trace their roots to the Jahaji families. So in a way, this is a foundational term. These are foundational terms. So I feel that these are very much there.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Next.
And we have another question.
There is a question from Shomipendra sir.
Yeah, it's another question from Shomipendra sir. Sir, should I read it out?
Was the experience of the Girmetias with the reference to Fiji or Mauritius different from the Coolie diasporas of Canada or the America? In fact, what happened is that the these people were sent to some specific plantation colonies. Okay, as I said, the Kangani or the Maestris were basically sent to Sri Lanka, Ceylon, I mean, or Malay, or so these terms were used in the context of specific kind of journeys. Indenture was used basically to Fiji or Mauritius or Caribbean islands, basically, but not that these were not used to South America, for example, or even to North America. There were, but the number of migrants were less. I do not have statistical data right now, but the number were great, and you do not get much evidence of that in literary area. For example, Chitra Banerjee Divakaruni has written a series of poems which is about this experience. The series of poems, City of Iowa, I've forgotten the exact title of the poems, but you can find out if you Google search. In that series of poems, she traces the arrival and settlement of the Coolies in North America from the point of view of from feminist lens. So there is like that. There are, for example, narratives narratives of the Chinese coolies. For example, you see Amy Tan or Maxine Kingston. They have talked about their ancestral history, and that history is the history of the indentured laborers. It was there, very much there in China as well. So you have some narratives, obviously some narratives, but the narratives that we find in the Fiji society, Indo-Fiji society or Indo-Caribbean society, they are huge. And interestingly, many of these only later, went to Canada or to America. Okay, not to South America so much, but to North America, which includes both Canada and the US. So there are a lot of people. For example, Ramabai Espinette herself is one such writer. Okay, so there are examples of serial diaspora. Okay, these are examples of serial diaspora from one place to another. Okay, for example, you see Brij Bilal or Vijay Misra. Or some other people also, they are also descendants of the Coolie diaspora, but they moved from Fiji, for example, to Australia or to America. Okay, so Vijay Misra and other people like that, they have the history of the serial diaspora. And they are involved in studying diaspora from the point of view of the Coolie history. They are very much, they're very much involved in it, engaged in it, as if it is part of their own self, own identity. I had the fortune of meeting Vijay Misra, for example, and I had a wonderful talk with him, conversation with him, and this come out. Vijay Misra, for example, in one of the seminars in Shimla, talked about the Bideshia Gan, the songs that are Bideshia in Bihar villages, in UP villages. People still sing of Bideshia. Okay, the relatives who went away, got lost, and the people who are left behind, they sing through this particular genre of songs. They are called Bideshia songs, and this is basically Bhojpuri songs, okay? And many people who know Bhojpuri, the Piggy Mohan is a scholar who is a writer also, who is engaged in linguistic researches in the Bhojpuri language transformations. Okay, so Bhojpuri is the main thrust of many of the stories. And Girmitia, the term Girmitia, I remember Bridgeville says that it is a Bhojpurization of the anglicized term agreement. Okay, so interestingly, you can also think of the diaspora, this kind of diaspora, from the point of view of language, culture, different forms of culture. And therefore, many people in recent times, they are also interested in Bhojpuri language and how Bhojpuri has changed when they became unmoored. Their connections to the land is no more there. You know that when language any language is separated from the source, they move on along a different trajectory. They do not follow the original trajectory of the original language. Therefore, you see, English, American English moved differently from the British English, as you know. Same thing happened here also. Bhojpuri became took different kind of dimensions. Okay, and they often took different forms. They invented new language. They coined new words. So from that point of view, these are very important dates. So I hope I can have given answer. I've responded to the answer to a certain extent.
Yes, sir.
Any
Thank
other
you very
questions?
much. And thank you also to Somipendra sir for his wonderful questions. We have Sabine Laurit. Thank you for this very interesting lecture. We have some wonderful comments on your lecture, sir. Priyanka Mundur,
Thank
I'm
you.
glad to hear you. Thankful to you, sir, for giving me the opportunity to listen to you.
It's also pleasure on my behalf. I'm very glad to see you all.
There is also a
And
question from Priyanka Mondal, sir.
excuse me.
Priyanka
I
Mondal
couldn't
has a
hear.
question.
Yes, another
Priyanka
question.
Mondal has a question. Sir, what is the difference
Sir, what is the
between
difference between the internal migration and internal diaspora? Have one more query. What is cultural displacement? You see, these are the terms which are used now, but I don't believe in internal diaspora. Because diaspora is a term which has its own history, and it is very much concerned with the concept of a state. As you know, in its origin, there was a concept of a state, although the state was not in the form of modern state, as you know. But even then, there was some kind of a concept of a state, be it a state, a city-state, or different other kinds of state, or a community. So, in my book on diaspora, I have discussed this particular aspect, although not to a great extent. But you see, I have discussed this aspect that I do not believe in internal diaspora, the term internal diaspora. And ये ভারতী একটুখানি এটা দিয়ে দেবে, শেষ হয়ে গেছে আর কি, একটু চার্জ দিতে হবে, আচ্ছা একটু লাগিয়ে দেবে. Sorry, my charge is almost finished.
Okay,
So I don't accept the word, but it is usually used. I differ from other scholars, and in fact, the word internal diaspora is used in order to mean internal migration. So this is a different category altogether. You move from one place to another within the state. Natural displacement, you know that it comes after the actual displacement usually, and it is the condition of a diaspora, in the condition of an exile. Okay, so when you feel that you are divorced from the source of your language, the source of your culture, the source of your food, the source of everything that culture suggests. So not getting food, proper food, not getting rice and dal or much fish, example, a day or two, might hurl you altogether into a kind of cultural displacement. Okay, So this might happen even if you are moved away from your place in West Bengal to Delhi or in South India.
Yeah.
That kind of thing might happen. But it can happen obviously if you move to US or UK or to Malaysia or to Sri Lanka. This kind might happen. So that is, I hope this is my answer. And if there are other examples, I will be glad to other questions. I will be glad to respond. Or if there are no such
No,
questions, I
sir.
will be happy.
Yes,
There
sir.
are
We
other
have
questions.
two more questions. This is the first one
I have
by
several
Sabine Lauret.
questions.
And Aratika has so many questions in her mind, I guess.
So I don't know. Depending on your time, I will abide by your time and by your
No, sir, we have time. If you allow, then we
uh,
can entertain questions.
the idea of a new family created on the ship is fascinating. There are actual families crossing together also. Yes, there were actual families crossing together also. For example, husband and wife. In Sea of Poppies, you will find such example. Diti and her husband is one such couple. Also, mostly they were not. Mostly they were not related to each other, and therefore there was an extra kind of bonding among them, and the ship provided that kind of bonding. Uh, uh, I was not very sure to actually, because of the time factor, and that written on this, which is not available to you right now, but will be available to you later. I have not elaborated on, but no, that I have that article. I have tried to show that the home in Bihar or UP had one kind of dimension. But for all these people, the homes of the home was lost. The home became therefore they were emotionally detached from that kind of a home. And in a way, they were displaced and they actually the opportunity of striking family relationship with other people, other co-passengers. And the sheep actually provided a kind of a scope for that. They were staying together, they were facing similar kinds of problems, and activism grew up, developed, and they became a kind of a society. Not that there were not internal division or internal wranglings or internal enmities, but over and above all these things, a sense of family formation was clearly evident. And in the Sea of Poppies, you have one instance of marriage as well. Okay, so in different way, obviously this was, and these people struggled, launched a movement against the agents, and which resulted in a kind of a cohesion in the society itself, this extra familial kind of society. And as time went on, it flowered, it prospered, it developed further. And when they ultimately landed and were dispersed to many places, even then they did not lose connections. And they had their own ways of connections. And when the indenture period was over, they could contact and form a society. So yes, obviously the family formation was more than dependent on the blood relationship. There were actual families, but there were much more families, much more people who did not belong to the single families.
Okay.
So this is
Do I?
another comment from Somdatta Mondol. a
Oh,
good
Shamlata
overview
is
for,
also.
yes, a good overview for scholars to get interested in this area. Kudos. And this is the
Thank you,
last
Shamlata Di.
question. Thank you, thank you. This is the last question from the participants.
Are there
Are
any
there
accounts of Are there any accounts of Nepali indentured laborers? You mentioned hill people who are among the Girmitias. Thank you for your amazing. Uh, I'm not. I do not know whether there are Nepali narratives about Nepali indentured laborers. I do not know personally. At least I have not come across any in the critical literature. Okay, these things are coming up only recently, and therefore you see, I don't think that there are many. Obviously, if there are in some form or other, it will come to the surface later on. Okay, I'm not sure about that. I'm sorry, I've not come
Uh,
across any.
Actually, there are some accounts, I mean, in the Nepali language itself, the literature written in the Nepali language. And in Bangla, written about the hill people, it's mostly on Assam tea gardens and everything. Not much on the Nepali indentured laborers, but the laborers were taken from Chotnagpur plateau to Assam or Duars, maybe.
Yes,
And
they were also, many of them were also part of the indentured laborers movement.
yes,
And
yes,
as I
yes.
said in the beginning, they moved to different other areas. Even they
Mhm.
moved to South India. Okay, because they are also required by the colonial economy. I have mentioned that in the beginning, but when I actually conceived the question in the overseas journey. Okay, in
Mhm.
overseas journey, I have not come across any. Of course, there might be
Yeah,
many
yeah, yeah.
in the Bhasha literatures.
Mhm.
In
In the Bhasha literature,
literature
there
or
are
Hindi
actually.
literature, I think there are, because I have come across some such writings written by very recently, in last year probably. I came across one such narrative, which is also. I've forgotten the title of the book. Coolie camp or something like that. Okay, that is in ebook form. Okay, you can find that
Mhm.
if you Google search. But I've forgotten the title and the writer, of course. But they are written in Hindi or Indian languages, different Indian languages, or Nepalese language. But I do not
Uh,
know much
so
about this
can you
narratives.
repeat the name, sir? Your voice was breaking.
Uh, the title I've forgotten, but it has
Okay,
the
okay.
word coolie.
Okay,
Coolie
okay.
camp or something like that. Okay,
Acha, acha,
that
acha,
is
acha.
also about. I have purchased the book, but I have not read that because it will take long time for me to read the book because it is written in Hindi. I'm not very easy with. I'm not very proficient in
Sir,
reading
is
Hindi.
it Coolie lines?
Coolie lines, right, right.
Yeah,
It is
yeah, yeah,
Coolie
yeah.
lines. It is Coolie lines. Thank you so much. I have come
And
across this.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a very interesting book. And sir, you were
Uh,
talking about the multicultural space in the ship. So, what about the linguistic space? I mean, how is they used to communicate? Because maybe some were from Bihar and they had a different dialect of maybe Bhojpuri or Hindi. So, what about the linguistic aspect also changed in the ships?
Of course, of course. You know that basically these people came from uh, similar kind of areas like Bihar or UP or areas which border Haryana and Punjab. These times, they spoke either Hindi or in some dialects of Hindi or Bhojpuri. More or less they could understand the language, or over the years, over the days and months, they could somehow devise certain ways they learned the languages. Okay, so in a way communication was possible, and there were at certain stages interpreters as well, but the interpreters acted between the British officials or the agents or and the coolies. Okay.
Okay, sir.
So this
Yeah.
yes, this much I know. This much I can understand.
Okay, sir. Thank you very much. And so you were also talking about some Bangla documents, right? About the Girmitiya, the agreements present in the Bhasha also. Maybe in Hindi,
I
maybe
came
in.
across, yes, I came across this in a printed article. Probably it was a printed article, and it is also found in I think academia.edu, uh, which was hosted by Professor Crispin, Crispin. The full name I can't remember right at the moment. Okay,
Sir,
so
Professor Crispin Bates, yeah. Bates, I
huh?
think, Bates, Crispin Bates.
Maybe I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
And but the problem is that you cannot the words are so much hazy, the letters are such hazy that it will be very difficult to read that. I have come across a Bengali. I have not found out many Bengalis who took the journey, but probably Vijay Mishra spoke of one such Bengali whose name was Bechu. Bechu was it is to be found in his book on Indian diaspora. Okay, uh,
Okay.
Bechu was a educated person. Okay, and Bechu was discovered by a British historian. Bechu was discovered through his writings in contemporary English newspapers. Bechu contributed letters to those English newspapers. And therefore, you see, they were also in the nature of activism. They were activist kind of writing. So later on, these were archived, and through the archives, some historians and others came across them. So, about other Bengali writers or Bengali sources, I don't have much idea.
Okay. And so, like, if time permits, may I ask one question more, Kingshuk?
Yes, yes, Aratrika. If sir allows, then obviously.
Yeah, if sir
Okay, we
allows, I
may
will ask.
try. We may try. একটু জল খাওয়াবে?
Sir, sir, what question is like while working on this topic, we come across so many times Arkati and Sardars. So what exactly is the difference between an Arkati and what the role did they play between a Sardar and a Arkati? And does was it related to the
Sorry,
recruitment process?
sorry, sorry if the voice breaks actually. Huh? I couldn't
Okay, sir.
listen to properly.
Okay, sir, I will repeat the question. Sir, what
Please.
exactly is the difference between an Arkati and a Sardar? Is it depends on the recruiting system, legal or illegal recruiting system, or the role they play?
Yes. Actually, Arcatis were mainly the uh, recruiting agents. Okay, but they were sub-agents, and they were given agency. থাক আমার কাছেই থাক। They were given agency illegally. They acted illegally. So artists were not properly sanctioned legal agents. They were illegal agents. Okay, they were local people. Many were returnees as well. So they had easy access to villages, to people whom they know or whom they can approach because the language was same or similar. So these people, the Arcatis, were very useful agents, useful actually players in this kind of recruiting processes. So from that point of view, you see, this was the role of the Arcatis. And the most important thing is that they were illegal. Okay.
Okay.
But Sardars and the Maistris, they had some kind of leadership role. Okay. They herded the flock together. in some instances, for example, in the maestries or in the Kanganis, they were solely responsible for recruiting and looking after and employment in the proper places. For all these things, Sardars and the maestries were responsible. So their role is the supervisory role, which was sanctioned by the colonial authorities. Okay, so this is the basic differences, and they held sway over their flocks because they are powerful people. They can immediately dispense them from the services. Okay, and take away money from them. They can deduct money from their wages. The people under their supervision were debt. They were related to the debt. They are bonded, a kind of a bonded laborers. Bonded in the sense that they cannot leave their contract within the specified period of 3 years or 5 years, usually 5 years, for the indentured laborers. So they were. So slavery was not altogether abolished. It continued in a different form. So from a different point of view, you know that there are many historians, many. For example, the author I refer to, Totaram Sanadha, he said that it is another kind of slavery. Okay, all the historians of the migrant laborers or the historians of colonial economy, most of them say that this is an extension of the slavery system in another form. Okay, effectually, it's all the same.
Yeah. Kingshuk, do you have any more questions from our participants?
No, we don't have any more questions from the participants.
Okay.
I think we should stop there.
Okay, sir.
Yes,
Surely.
I think we should officially
It's
end
more
this
than
Yeah,
session
it's
here.
almost 9 o'clock.
It's almost 2 hours, sir, and we are like
Sorry.
overwhelmed. Thank you so much.
Yes, I'm
Thank you
like
so much. It's a pleasure.
Thank you
writing
so
down
much
and
for
down
your valuable time, sir. We are very much enriched.
It's a pleasant experience talking to you, being part of the same platform. Okay, so it's of course pleasure, and thank you for inviting me. It was really a pleasant moment for me. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much,
you.
sir.
Thank
The
you so
pleasure
much,
is
sir.
all ours.
Yes. And really we
Thank you.
get to host someone who is like working on a same topic, working in. So it's a pleasure as well.
My purpose was basically to offer a kind of a guideline or overall kind of a thing, because there might be many students, young students, and research scholars who might be interested in the area, and therefore he can, if they come to know about these certain nuanced areas, they can take up their topics from those areas. That is why I try to speak to. From that point of a perspective, I chose my area.
And it has been wonderful, sir. Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Yes,
And
sir. Thank
if
you
our
so much.
participants have any
So
more
we must
questions,
call it a
yeah, we'll
we
call it
must
a
call
day
it a
today.
day or
And
call it
thank
a
you so
night,
much for
whatever
joining
you
us.
say.
So call it a
So
night,
thank you.
actually. And
Thank you
our
very
Wonderful
much,
session it was.
You're saying something?
and good night. And good night.
No.
Yes,
Bye.
actually,
Bye.
voice is cracking. Good night, sir. Good night.
Good
And
night.
the
Good night. Good
participants
night.
will share our next. Good night, sir. And next
Good night.
lectures and everything names on the WhatsApp and Facebook and
Yes,
Twitter
and
groups.
we
It's
request
good
our
to-
participants to
And,
please subscribe this channel for further updates, and
and follow our website calcom.org for more updates. And please subscribe to this channel and hit the like button. Thank you.
thank you
And
so
good
much.
night.
Good night.